Introducing fermentation. Fermentation is a very complicated and detailed chemical process. While we don't need to know exactly how fermentation works on a chemical level, we need to understand the basics behind it because it is the process through which alcohol is created. This means that every alcoholic product in your bar went through fermentation, and this is why it is so important to know the basics behind it. In this lesson, we'll be looking at how fermentation works and the relationship between fermentation and starch. Let's start by looking at how fermentation works. Let's take an easy example with fermentation: wine. When grapes are growing in a field, the sun allows them to produce sugar inside the grape itself. When these grapes are picked at their ultimate ripeness, they are then squeezed, creating a grape juice which is full of flavor and sugar. If yeast is added to this grape juice, it begins to eat the sugar and turn it into alcohol. The result is that you are left with wine which has a grape flavor and is alcoholic. Now that we understand the basics behind this, let's look at fermentation and starch. As we've just seen, fermentation takes place to produce alcohol when there is both sugar and yeast. However, some alcohols are made from things that have no sugar in them, for example, grain and potatoes. This is possible because these contain what is known as starch, and it is starch that is able to create the sugars needed to allow fermentation. A good way to think about starch is that it holds trapped sugar or potential energy. Over time, brewers discovered that by adding water to grain, it signals to the grain that it is time to reproduce. This in turn causes the starch to transform into sugar in order to give the grain the energy it needs to grow. Just before it starts to grow and germinate, the process is stopped by heating up the starch and water. What is left is sugar and the wonderful flavors of whatever grain or ingredient was being used. By adding yeast to this, it can transform the sugar into alcohol with the beautiful flavors from the ingredient. Now that you've finished this lesson, you understand how fermentation works and the relationship between fermentation and starch. Enjoy the next lessons, where you will learn all about the different alcohols in your